What if I told you that the United States government once hired psychics to spy on the Soviet Union? That the Pentagon held spoon-bending parties for generals? That the CIA spent 20 years and millions of dollars trying to train soldiers to read minds? This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is declassified. This is the secret history of the psychic arms race, and honestly, it might be the strangest chapter in American military history. Let's talk about it. In 1995, the CIA did something unprecedented. They opened their files on a 20-year program called Project Stargate and said, "Here. Look. Judge for yourself." What they revealed wasn't just a story about psychics, it was a story about fear. About how scared the US government really was during the Cold War. About how paranoia can make rational people believe in magic. Because when the stakes are total annihilation, the boundaries of what seems reasonable, they start to shift. And what happened in 1978? That's where this gets real. Picture this, it's 1978. A Soviet Tu-22 bomber, a state-of-the-art reconnaissance aircraft, goes down in the jungles of Zaire, in Central Africa. Both superpowers want that wreckage. The US wants Soviet tech, the Soviets want to keep their secrets. But here's the problem, the jungle canopy is so thick that satellites can't see through it. We've got no idea where this plane is. So, the Pentagon does something desperate. They call a woman named Rosemary Smith. She's an administrative assistant with no military training. They sit her down in a dark room, put her in a trance, and ask her to find a plane she's never seen, in a country she's never visited. She draws a circle on a map. Later, and Jimmy Carter himself confirmed this in 1995, they found the wreckage within 3 miles of where she said it would be. Now, what do you do with that information? This is where it gets really interesting, and really scary. There's a mathematical concept called minimax, developed by John von Neumann. He was one of the smartest humans who ever lived, and he helped build the atomic bomb. His theory basically says, in a nuclear standoff, you don't plan for what is likely. You plan for the worst possible outcome. Always. So, let's do the math. What if there is even a 1% chance the Soviets can read minds? A 1% chance they can move objects with thought? A 1% chance they can see your nuclear submarines from Moscow? Under minimax, that 1% becomes 100%. You cannot afford to ignore it. This isn't belief. This isn't faith. This is cold, calculating logic forcing you to take psychics seriously. And that is terrifying. Back in 1942, a Harvard psychologist named Gertrude Schmeidler ran an experiment. She asked people if they believed in psychic phenomena, then she tested them. She found something fascinating. Believers actually performed better on psychic tests. She called the skeptics goats and the believers sheep. Now, this was just an academic study. But the Pentagon read it. They realized something uncomfortable, the military is full of sheep. Why? Because people who join the army often believe in something bigger than themselves and trust their instincts. As those believers rose through the ranks, they ended up in command positions. By the 1970s, you had true believers running actual military programs. And that's when things got weird. Every strange story needs a strange character. Meet Dr. Andrea Puharich. A medical doctor, researcher, and the bridge between legitimate science and the occult. Puharich worked for the Army, the Navy, even NASA. But he also believed in telepathy and psychic powers. He convinced the military to take it seriously. At one point, he led expeditions to Mexico to find hallucinogenic mushrooms, the flesh of the gods, because he thought they might unlock psychic potential. With government funding. Read that again, the United States military sent researchers to find magic mushrooms to train psychic spies. That actually happened. Puharich became the link between the laboratory and the seance room, and even though the military didn't know what to make of him, they kept paying him. But arms races are a two-way street. While America was experimenting with psychics, the Soviets were panicking. Why? Because of a hoax. In the 1960s, a French magazine published a story claiming the U.S. Navy used telepathy to communicate with the nuclear submarine Nautilus while it was under the polar ice cap. It was a total fabrication. It never happened. But the Kremlin didn't know that. They thought, the Americans have psychic technology. We're falling behind. So, they created their own programs. They rebranded telepathy as biocommunication. They turned psychokinesis into electromagnetic emissions. A lie created a reality. Both superpowers were now racing to develop weapons that didn't exist, based on a story that was completely made up. Meanwhile, in 1962, American engineers at the Moscow embassy detected something terrifying: microwave beams aimed directly at the building. They were targeted at the offices of the ambassador and the CIA station chief. The US called it mind control. The Soviets called it psychotronics, weapons that attacked the central nervous system. Both sides took it deadly seriously. The Pentagon asked DARPA to study the biological effects. They exposed monkeys to the same frequencies and found brain damage. Later, they realized the power estimates were wrong and the damage was exaggerated. But the fear was already there. The idea that someone could attack your brain from a distance. That is the stuff of nightmares. Then we get to the most infamous figure in all of this, Uri Geller. The man who bends spoons with his mind. Now, you probably think Geller is just a magician with clever tricks. And you're probably right. But the Pentagon didn't think that. They thought he was real. In Washington, D.C., high-ranking officers, generals and colonels, attended what they called spoon-bending parties. They would sit around with Geller, shouting at metal cutlery, trying to bend it with willpower. Colonel John Alexander of the Special Forces called Geller a great friend. General Albert Stubblebine, the head of Army Intelligence, wished Geller worked for him. They weren't just curious, they were believers. The most powerful military on Earth was throwing dinner parties for a psychic performer. Out of all this came Project Stargate, the official, government-funded program to turn psychic ability into a weapon. Researchers at Stanford developed training methods, believing that psychics could be made, not born. They taught soldiers to enter altered states to practice remote viewing, seeing distant locations with their minds. And here is the part that blows my mind: it was actually used in real operations. In 1981, they tried to locate a kidnapped American general in Italy. In 1986, they tracked Muammar Gaddafi before a U.S. airstrike. They even tried to find drug-smuggling ships in the Atlantic. The government was genuinely using psychics for intelligence work. Whether it worked is debated, but it happened. But when you operate in secrecy, you lose perspective. Stargate was classified, meaning there was no outside review and no peer pressure. The believers only talked to other believers. It became an echo chamber, and the targets got weird. They started looking for UFO bases. Searching for mythical religious artifacts. Chasing science fiction instead of military intelligence. When you're in a bubble, you don't notice how strange things have gotten. But eventually, the regular military did notice. They started asking why they were spending millions to hunt for aliens. The credibility that Stargate had built began to crumble. Of course, there were skeptics the whole time. Two names you need to know are Martin Gardner and James Randi. Gardner was a writer who spent his career debunking pseudoscience. He pointed out the fatal flaws: no controls, cherry-picked data, and results that couldn't be replicated. In real science, if you can't repeat the experiment, it didn't happen. Psychic research was never repeatable. Then there's Randi. James Randi was a magician, and he knew something scientists didn't: humans lie. Humans cheat. Scientists are trained to study nature, and nature doesn't deceive you. But people do. Randy spent decades showing that every psychic trick could be done with simple sleight of hand. In 1979, Randy pulled off what might be the greatest scientific sting of the 20th century. He sent two young magicians to the McDonnell Laboratory for psychical research. He told them to pretend to be psychic. The scientists were thrilled. They ran tests, published papers, and were completely fooled for years by simple magic tricks. In 1983, Randy revealed everything. The psychic research community never recovered. Because if you can't tell the difference between a real psychic and a magician with basic training, you don't have a science. You have a vulnerability. And the military had been vulnerable for decades. So why did it last so long? Why did Stargate survive for 20 years? First, sunk cost. Imagine you're a general. You've spent millions on psychic research and staked your reputation on it. Admitting it's fake means admitting you wasted taxpayer money on magic shows. Second, secrecy. Stargate was a special access program, meaning almost no oversight. No Congress. No outside audits. Just you and your fellow believers. It is actually easier to keep a program alive in secret than to kill it, because killing it requires an explanation. Keeping it just requires silence. And the Pentagon is very, very good at silence. In 1995, it finally ended. The Soviet Union was gone, and the Cold War was over. The existential fear that created Stargate evaporated. Without that fear, the program couldn't survive. The CIA commissioned an independent review, and the conclusion was clear: Stargate produced no useful intelligence. Nothing you couldn't get from a newspaper. So, they shut it down and declassified the files. For the first time, the American public learned about psychic spies, spoon-bending parties, and millions of dollars spent chasing ghosts. It sounds like satire, but it is all real. So here's the question that keeps me up at night: are we doing this again? Right now? Because Minimax logic hasn't gone away. If there is a 1% chance AI becomes sentient, a 1% chance a rival power has a mind-reading weapon, under the rules of nuclear paranoia, you have to act like it's 100% true. That means somewhere, right now, there might be a new generation of believers and a new secret program. The details change, but the fear doesn't. This has been the secret history of the psychic arms race. Let me know in the comments, would you have funded the psychics? Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.